Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Beyond the Stands. Of course, I'm your host, Rick Semmler. Remember, you can always follow Beyond the Stands on WTWO's MyWabashValley.com. Joining me today is Vigo County Superintendent Dr. Himsel. Mr. Himsel, nice to have you here in the studio.
Good morning. Thanks for having us.
One of the reasons I wanted to have him in, high school sports, not just in Vigo County, statewide, nationally, it's a changing landscape right now, and certainly changing in Indiana and changing in Terre Haute. Last week it was announced that Terre Haute North and Terre Haute South will be changing conferences. They're heading to the Sagamore Conference starting in the 2026-2027 season. They will be joining West Lafayette, Harrison, McCutcheon, Danville, and Lebanon. Terre Haute North and Terre Haute South will be joining that for a 16 conference. I wanted to have Dr. Himsel in to just talk about it. He's a big part of everything, obviously, Vigo County school and athletics. So first of all, talk about the decision to go to the Sagamore Conference.
You know, as we think about conferences, it's about trying to create opportunities for our kids to compete, and that's particularly true in football. The football scheduling is where conferencing becomes the most important. When you're playing 20 basketball games, you can fit in other games, but in football, it's very limited, and it's hard to get games scheduled with high-quality competition. So we needed to make sure that we were in a conference. Our Conference Indiana partners had indicated that they were all looking in different directions for a variety of different reasons. And we had contacts out from the people in the Lafayette area who said, are you interested and would you like to join us in a conference? And those discussions have been ongoing for quite some time, and we reached agreement and thought that this is a good place for us to partner. West Lafayette, Harrison, and McCutcheon are similar in size to North and South, and Danville and Lebanon are both growing suburban schools on the west side of Indianapolis and will soon be as big as what North and South are.
The big thing I took away from it, I don't think the public understands, is we're in Conference Indiana right now, Terre Haute North and Terre Haute South. Conference Indiana, in my opinion, just isn't going to exist possibly as soon as 2 years, because Bloomington North is leaving for Mid-State. Bloomington South is looking for a conference. Southport was applying to the MIC. Like, you guys had to make a move to find a conference, correct?
Correct. We indicate about a year ago, there was indications that the other members of the Conference Indiana partners were interested in going in different directions. And so we either had the choice of waiting until it happened and then scrambling, or trying to be proactive and try to find other partners, and we chose to be proactive and find other partners.
Now, you picked the Sagamore, and you went into it a little bit about the size, but how many, you talked about talking to Lafayette teams as well, but were there other conferences, you don't have to name them, but did you check out maybe 2-3 other conferences? Or, just talk about that. Did you look around?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when we first got these indications from other Conference Indiana schools, we first talked about where are schools similar in size to North and South and what are the possibilities. Obviously, you don't put all of your eggs in one basket. You talk to multiple people. The Sagamore Conference is the one that just kept coming back as being a situation where there were like-minded people who were committed to a longer-term partnership, and that was important to us.
I think one thing I take away from this, and I can speak from this, people that follow me know, I've covered sports going on 22 years here in Vigo County and Terre Haute. I have kids in the Vigo County School Corporation, a senior and a freshman, that play sports. So I pay close attention to this. I talk to a lot of people on the details of this. It matters to me very much. So this is one of the reasons I wanted to have Dr. Himsel in. You talked about the Sagamore Conference. I think it's just as good as Conference Indiana, if not better. You mentioned it. Danville and Lebanon are 3A schools, but they're very successful 3A schools. I think from all the sports out there, this will be a challenging conference for Terre Haute North and Terre Haute South.
It will be, and if I'm not mistaken, Lebanon may be 4A in the upcoming redesignation. McCutcheon, Clayton Richard is a former pitcher for the San Diego Padres, and they've got some historical athletes similar to what we have here in North and South. Their history doesn't go as far back as North and South, but they have put together some very successful teams. Lebanon, of course, has quite a history, particularly in basketball, in terms of people who have played there and went on to be successful at the college and professional ranks. So there is some history that does help us that we can build upon, similar to North and South. But more importantly, this is a conference that's more about the future, and that's what we want to do for North and South. Is we want to stay focused on how do we help our kids be in competitive situations, so that they learn to compete with anyone from anywhere.
I think you just nailed it right there. Compete with anyone, anywhere. They were in the mix. It was 12 years ago the best conference in Indiana, and it slipped a little bit. You have to be honest where Vigo County Athletics is. It slipped. That doesn't mean it has to stay down here. It can go back up. How much do you want to challenge the teams, the coaches, the players in this area, to get back up to that level, not only like for the Sagamore Conference, but statewide, be competitive again?
It's not just about sports. Whether we're talking about welders, whether we're talking about people who want to go into the medical field, whether we have engineers, you talk about it with our athletes. We want our kids to be able to compete with anyone, anywhere, and we have a history from which to build upon. We've got Dr. Menegeni, who's coming back and putting some investments in Terre Haute, Dr. Evan Kakaska, who's one of the leading pediatricians up at Peyton Manning's Children's Hospital. And then when you go to the athlete side, Tony McGee and Anthony Thompson and Brian Evans and Tommy John and Cam Cameron, and I know I left a bunch of people out, but you know the history. This place is known for having people with the talent to go compete in other places. And that talent is still here. Our commitment is to develop that talent so that they can compete with anyone, anywhere, regardless of the field that they choose.
I'll be honest, as a parent, I like to hear that. I'm not gonna lie, I like to hear that. I want to thank our sponsors of the show, Crow Equipment Incorporated and Andrews Heating and Air Conditioning, your 2018 American Standard Heating and Air Conditioning, building a higher standard award winner. For quality and reliability you can depend on, call Andrews Heating and Air Conditioning, 765-832-9401. Okay, so the biggest thing I got, text messages from parents, calls, is when you join the conference, not that people were mad, but they were asking, why can Terre Haute North and Terre Haute South not just go independent? You addressed a little bit of that. Football is a big reason, but I think for multiple sports, scheduling is just a bear. Is that the biggest reason? Or just talk about why independent is not a good route to go?
It's particularly true in football, but you're correct. There are other sports where it's an issue as well. The conference affiliation helps make sure that we have a full schedule. And there are independents throughout the state, and in some of those sports, they don't play full schedules as a result of it. Because when you're in a conference affiliation, there's usually a conference tournament. If you're talking about wrestling, there's a Saturday where there's a conference tournament. In cross country, there's going to be a Saturday where there's a conference event that's going on. Well, when other conferences are having their conference event and you're an independent, there's no one to go out and play that weekend. It is particularly true in football. But that is the reason why conference affiliation does have some importance, is to make sure that there are full schedules for our kids.
Another one, several of the coaches told me is why they don't want to be independent, and I understand this. They like the conference schedule. They like to give their kids a goal of playing meaningful games to win a conference title. Also, players work hard and they deserve all conference honors. Do you believe in all those things of a reason to be in a conference?
Absolutely, those things are important. The most important of those is to make sure we have a full schedule for the kids to compete. But you're correct in terms of there are years when building for a state championship is an appropriate goal, and there are years when building towards a conference championship is the more appropriate goal. The ebbs and flows in terms of the talent distribution across the state. There are times when we're the ones who have the most talent that's come up at the same time, and there's times when there's other schools in other parts of the state that have. But by having the smaller and the bigger goals, that does help our kids stay focused, have a goal to point towards. But more importantly, it's not just about competing against ourselves. It's about competing against anyone, anywhere in the state.
One of the things I tell people it's so hard is we're on an island out here. I mean, it's just the way it is. Evansville's 2 hours away, Lafayette's 2 hours away, Indy's an hour away, and let's be honest, with the way Indy has exploded, a lot of times those schools just don't want to come over here. That's just a fact. The way it is. So it makes, like you called the independent, the scheduling so hard. One question I get asked a lot is going to the WIC. I have mixed feelings about that. Obviously, the matches or the games would be closer because the schools are closer. But to me, the schools are all smaller than Terre Haute North and Terre Haute South, and I don't know how well that would do for them when they get to the state tournament playing smaller schools. You don't have to go into a lot of detail about the WIC, but was moving to the WIC ever consideration for Terre Haute North and Terre Haute South?
You know, obviously, we didn't take anything off the table because we didn't know what our options were going to be. But there are obviously complications in that regard as well. And anytime you're talking about a conference affiliation, it's a two-way street. It's not just we want to be a part of that conference. You also have to have that conference want you to be a part of it as well. And so as when we talked about all those different options that have existed, you also have to make sure that you are with people who want to partner with you.
I like how you said that, because that leads to my next question. You got to have people that want to partner with you. I heard a lot of talk about the Mid-State Conference, which is Mooresville, Franklin, Plainfield. I think that would be a great fit for us. But at the same time, like you said, I heard that they did not want us. You might not answer the question, but are they in other conferences, some of them not wanting Terre Haute right now?
Without getting into specifics, I can tell you that there were some conferences that did not entertain having us even give a presentation as to how we might be able to benefit a particular conference. And when we dug a little bit deeper and started asking why we at least didn't get an opportunity to present our case, the two things that came up repeatedly were travel times, and again, that part about being on an island that you talked about, and also the current state of our facilities. And those were the two most common answers that we received.
I appreciate you saying that. And again, he knows this. I'm not putting him on the spot. I invest a lot of time in this. I had heard those same exact two things. So when you hear that, the facilities, I also heard that Terre Haute right now is not competitive in some sports, competitive enough that the teams didn't want to come over here. When you hear that, I mean, this is you're the superintendent of this county. Does it make you mad? Like, I want this fixed. Like, what are your thoughts when you hear, other conferences or schools say that about Vigo County?
Well, first of all, I know it's not true because I know that we have some extremely talented individuals here. And those talented individuals, in my opinion, can compete against anyone anywhere in our state. But what it speaks to more broadly is we still have work in front of us to put us in a position to where our kids can go out and prove to other people that we can compete with anyone anywhere. And that's the work that we've been doing for the last 2 years. That's the work we're going to continue to do. As you know, we've done our facility forums, and our facility forums have been all about making sure people understand our current reality, because we have to figure out a path forward that lives within that reality.
He is trying to make a difference. I can tell you that. I know some of the stuff, and we'll get into it. Dr. Himsel is trying to make a difference in this area. I want to remind people the different ways that you can follow the podcast now on Spotify, CastBox, Pocket Cast, and iHeartRadio. Okay, so right now, we're talking 2025, we're in April of 2025. What is your vision right now going forward for Vigo County Athletics?
Whether it's Vigo County Athletics or whether it's our academic programs, is to create a scenario that we develop the talent that we have so they can go out and compete with anyone, anywhere. That's simply where we're at.
How far do you feel, because it's not there right now. I'm not saying it's not. How far do you feel it is away from maybe being able to do that?
We still have a ways to go, but we have put some pieces in place in the last 2 years that I think are going to definitely move us in that way. I think we've made some coaching decisions. I think we've made some other decisions in terms of some academic decisions that are putting us on the path to achieve that. We have some things that we're hopeful that we'll be able to talk about here publicly very shortly. Again, it's because you got to have your partners who are willing to come with you in a position where they're ready to start talking about it publicly, but we're very close to being able to do that, and I think that's going to be exciting for our community all around. Okay,
so we call that in TV business teasing. You won't go into details, but you want to give us a little hint of what we're talking about here?
We are working, whether you're talking about academics or athletics, and in this case I'm talking more about academics, where we are trying to build upon the expertise and the excellence that we already have and try to figure out how we can scale that up so that more kids can access those programs.
Okay. Got me interested on that. That's why I had to ask there. Okay, so I know you've had your hands in on things, and one big thing you've had your hand is on coaching hires. Some of the recent coaches hires, specifically coaches' pay. I've been in meetings with you before, and you brought this up where the pay had to get better to get better coaches at the end of the day. Can you talk about that being a part of the hiring process recently for many of the new coaches in Vigo County, and how you've increased the pay for them to get better coaches?
Well, the pay is an aspect that's for all of our employees. We were very aggressive in the last contract to try to increase the pay for those at the beginning spots, whether you're talking about our education assistants, whether we're talking about our first-year teachers, as well as eliminate a provision that was in our previous contract that we did not acknowledge years of experience when they came over for the pay. And that's the biggest one from the coaching perspective that made a difference. But that's also made a difference in being able to recruit other talent to come and work with our kids. We want the most talented teachers, the most talented coaches working with our kids. It's a process. It's going to take us time to get there. We have some very talented individuals, and we want to make sure that we can keep them. So we still have work to do in terms of doing that. And it looks like, after yesterday and seeing the forecast from the state of Indiana, the economic forecast for the state of Indiana, that this upcoming budget is going to make this a very difficult next 2 years to continue to make progress in that regard.
I think a big thing you nailed on the head there is honoring previous experience from coaches in other counties coming in. That's been a big drawback in the past, but I know you're honoring it now, and it's made a huge difference in some of the hires you've done recently. So I do give you credit for that. I know everybody's going to criticize one way or another, but I do give you credit for that. I do have to ask, there's 4 things I've always said for Vigo County to get better right now. They have to have a better strength and conditioning program, better feeder programs, better facilities, and better coaches pay. We've addressed several of those things. One thing going around is the strength and conditioning program. There's a lot of rumors going around that there are strength and conditioning coaches coming, training programs coming. Can you talk about that? Is that something being addressed? Because right now, that is one downfall for Vigo County Athletics is the strength and conditioning programs that other counties have are way ahead of Vigo County. Is that being addressed, and are there hires on the way for that?
There's no question that when you compare where we're at with other school districts, that is an area that we have to improve. What we've done is we've updated the job description so that we have a person who is dedicated and has been trained in this area for these future positions. We've got some postings out. We'll go through. We've got to go through our normal staffing thing, and obviously we have to fit that together with the information we get from the state legislature in terms of the upcoming budget. But our commitment is to, especially with the changes in diploma requirements and PE no longer having the same requirements as it had in the past, is to make sure that we do have someone on each of our staffs who has been trained in being a strength and conditioning specialist. And that's going to be, I think, make a difference in us developing an ongoing program for our athletes.
Again, I love to hear that because, in today's age, strength, speed, all that is a huge in high school sports now. When you mentioned that, you said each staff, is that start out as a Vigo County, maybe one hire, or are you trying to get one at each of the high schools?
Well, our goal is at each of our high schools. We want all of our high school kids to be competitive. And so as we have 3 high schools, we want to make sure that we have 3 opportunities for our kids to be successful. And so that's our reality, is that we want to make sure that each of our high school athletes have access to someone who has a specialty area in this field.
Okay, the next subject I got to touch, and this is a tough one because the referendum, everything we talked about, facilities. You mentioned it. One of the reasons we maybe didn't get looked at by conferences because of facilities. The facilities got to get better. Whether it's turf on the football fields or the baseball fields or basketball or, I told people, and they don't always understand, I want turf for everything. I know it costs a bunch of money. Taxes will go up, this and that. But, it's not just for sports. I tell people all the time, I see the band kids out there on the hot pavement or at night when the lights aren't on. If you have turf on the football field, the kids can use that in the summertime or when they're practicing. They can turn the lights on for the kid. Turf can be used for multiple sports, like band, other activities. And it's not just turf. How much do the facilities a subject for you and have to get better sports-wise?
Again, this is not just sports. This is academics. This is all across the board. But when you specifically to the sports thing and you talk about the turf, one of the things you have to weigh in the turf is if you put in the turf, you're also no longer mowing. You're no longer putting insecticide and herbicide and seeding and watering. You're no longer lining, spending 4, 5, 6 hours doing the lining of the fields and the preparation for those fields. So you regain that time back to be able to devote to other preventive maintenance issues. That's a complicated subject in order to try to navigate. It's not as obvious and as easy of answers, but there's pros and there's cons both ways on that regard. You also have fewer rainouts, you have fewer missed games, you have fewer cancellations. You're correct in that it can be sport. We would be able to be in a position to host ISMA events, which would help our band people, so our bands don't have to travel as far, and they have a weekend where we would be able to host instead of travel. Those are all factors that need to go into it. The reality that we have is that in 1972, when we're basically with our current consolidation, is we had over 20,000 students in the district, and we had over about 1,500 students in each of the grade levels, and some grade levels up around 1,600 or 1,700. The reality as we look at our demographic study moving forward is that our senior classes are actually going to drop into about the 750 to 780 range. That's about where North and South High School were when they opened back in 1972. These are just realities of what we're facing and trying to make decisions so that we have the most up-to-date, modernized facilities, not just in our sports world, but also in our academic world. We have buildings that were built before the internet was widespread. We have buildings that were built before Wi-Fi had ever been thought of. We have buildings that were built at a time when the film strip projector and the overhead projector were the only two electrical needs in the room. That's no longer the case now that individual computer devices is a normal thing to have for every child. And so there's a lot of modernization that we need to do. In 1972, the primary learning method was sit and get, where the teacher stood up and lectured and the kids sat there and took notes. Now it's much more interactive and much more moving around the room. So all of our spaces need to be modernized to fit what we know is effective teaching and learning, whether you're talking about teaching and learning in the classroom or teaching and learning in a lab setting or in a sports facility. And all those things need to be addressed. At the same time, we have to deal with the realities of the Senate Bill 1, which was just passed, which is going to put limits on what we can do from a property tax perspective. We need to be cognizant of the fact that schools only have property taxes. It's its only mechanism for raising revenue to address these particular facilities. And we also have the reality that since 2010, if you were to take the per student number that we received from the state to support the people part of the business, the teachers, the counselors, the principals, the nurses, and so forth, and take that to 2025 and you put it through the inflationary calculator, we're about $8 million behind where we should be if the state of Indiana had kept up with inflationary parts. And it's going to be nearly impossible for the state to make any dent or impression on that in the next upcoming legislative session, given the economic forecast that they received yesterday.
Very informative. Appreciate that. Again, I want to thank the sponsors of the show, Crow Equipment Incorporated, and Andrews Heating and Air Conditioning. Also, remember, you can follow the show on Spotify, CastBox, Pocket Cast, and iHeartRadio. Okay, so the next question is transfers. The last several years, probably about the last 10 years, Vigo County has lost a ton of students academically and athletics to Northview, South Vermilion, North Central. One, has it been a concern to you to see the amount of kids leaving the area? And then two, let's just start with that. Has it been a concern to you to see, I mean, not only kids leaving, but every time a kid leaves, that's money to Vigo County.
Yeah. Obviously, it's a concern in terms of the fact that the state has set up a situation where the money follows the child. But instead of stressing and worrying about kids leaving, our more focus is how do we create an environment that kids want to come to? And our focus is not on how do we prevent things from happening, but how do we build things that people want to be a part of? And that's comes back to that mantra of how do we create an academic and a sports environment, athletic environment, a music environment, an art environment where kids can come here and compete with anyone, anywhere, and they seek us out instead of the other way around.
Couple more questions for you. I know you're a busy man. I don't want to keep you too much longer. So you talked about how do you create an environment to bring people. So I want to get your thoughts. The new IHSA transfer rule, it's going to really, not just Terre Haute, Vigo County, it's going to impact the entire state. It's kind of like the wild, wild west of college athletics right now. What do you think of the new transfer rule, and how do you think it's going to impact Vigo County?
It's really too early to tell. Anytime you have a change of this magnitude occur, you have your initial thoughts of what you think is going to happen, and then when it actually plays out, there's some things that happen that no one even thought of, or the things that people thought were going to be issues aren't really the issues. So it's really too early to tell.
Do you think it could benefit Vigo County?
It could turn into a benefit if we talk about building the kind of thing that people want to be a part of. And that's the reason why our focus is on how do we create the conditions that people want to be a part of this community, want to be a part of our schools. And that's why we're focused on that aspect of things, because in that situation, then the transfer portal becomes a positive thing instead of a negative thing.
You keep talking about building something people want to be a part of. You've mentioned 1972. I've heard that way too many times because of the status of the buildings around here. So my next question is, I come from one school, Brownsburg High School. It's a big school, so I'm used to big schools. Terre Haute schools aren't tiny. I will always wanted, I've never asked you your thought on, do you think this town would be better off multiple schools or one school?
Those are the things that the school board and I are actually going through at this moment. My job as a superintendent is to make sure our school board has as much data as they can so that they know the reality of what we're dealing with. Part of what we did in our facility forums is to basically lay out the information that our board is considering and having to look at. Our situation with our facilities is not limited to high schools. Devaney, Wabash, and Deming are now, I think, 47 or 48 years old. We have other buildings. Rio Grande is over 50 years old. The newest buildings in our district, Fayette, Franklin, and Consolidated, are 21 years old. What we have learned through our facility study is that we have work to do in all of our buildings. It's not just the high schools. It's every single one of our buildings. And it's not just our 3 high schools that are in high immediate need. We have some elementary and middle schools that are also in high immediate need. And so what we're working on doing is developing a comprehensive plan for how do we address this. We know that there is no possible way to do this all at one chunk. So how do we stagger the work? How do we put together a plan over multiple years so that we end in a place where we don't repeat the mistakes, but we put ourselves in a position to where we have the money to continue to do preventive maintenance so that when we upgrade our buildings 40 or 50 years from now, we're not faced with another superintendent and another school board, another group of parents and community members trying to figure out how to do this exact same issue and solve it again. We want to put ourselves in a position where we update and modernize our buildings, but do so in a way to where we've built in a mechanism to do the preventive maintenance so that we don't find ourselves in this exact same situation 40 or 50 years down the road.
Before I let you go, anything you want to address that we haven't touched, or just your vision, your message to people? I give you credit. I know you're always in the spotlight. You take heat one way or another on things, but you're always a parent. So anything you would like to leave a message before we finish up this?
You know, a couple things. First of all, some of the things that we talked about with the facility forum, we talked about some of the things with the data, all of that is on our website. If anyone wants to go and check it out, watch the information that we shared at a board meeting, watch the information we shared at a facility forum. It is out there and ready to go. All of the updates that Gibraltar has done throughout the facility study is there so they can see all the pros and cons and deficiencies and pluses and minuses of each of our buildings is there for people to see and study. The last thing I would leave is I'm a father of 5, and my 5 kids are about as different as they can be. I've got some kids that school comes very easy to, and I've got a child that school is extremely difficult to, and I've got everything in between. And as a parent, I live every day the difficulties of that wide range of student, and that informs my decisions that I make. Because I have a student who school doesn't work very well for and they struggle, it allows me to understand what do we need to do to help that striving learner that it's not easy, and they're always trying to figure out how to stay on top of it. And the parents are like, we've got to get them across the stage, and I'm not sure we're going to, but I understand that. I've lived that as well. I've also lived the situation where the child it's easy for them, and they understand it. And so how do you push them, and how do you make sure that they have enriching opportunities so that they get the full maximization of that? And I've got everything in between. And so that parent viewpoint, I think, really helps me understand the wide range of talent and experiences, resources, all those different things that our kids and our families have, and we've got to figure out how to get every single one of them across the stage with a meaningful diploma so that they can go out and live their dreams and become productive members of our community so that we can continue to be a strong, vibrant community.
Well, Dr. Himsel, I appreciate you taking some time. You certainly gave us a lot of information for people to process. A lot going on in high school sports, especially in Terre Haute. It'll be interesting to see how the next few months and several years go. Remember, you can always follow this show on mywabashvalley.com. That does it for this edition of Beyond the Stands.